Hello, everyone, and welcome to my metagame discussion on the current state of Standard Hearthstone. It's been a while since I've done one of these videos, and the reason for that is because balance changes have typically happened much faster in Hearthstone these days. Back in the day, it used to be months. If we ever even got balance changes to things, some people will remember, the Grim Patron, Frothing Berserker, Warsong Commander days, where we had just the same decks forever and ever and ever, and there was just a real resistance to any kind of meaningful balance change. That's obviously changed a great deal in the recent past. And we've kind of seen a little bit of pullback from the super fast balance changes that had been happening at the beginning of each expansion. And I think that's a good thing. I think that giving the metagame an opportunity to kind of settle and for people to have an opportunity to react to things rather than just knee-jerk banning, or not banning, sometimes, but knee-jerk nerfing or whatnot, whatever the outliers may be, giving the metagame a chance to evolve and people a chance to adapt to things, I think is much more fun. And also, in the long run, leads to much better decisions being made about what cards to nerf and ultimately to buff. We haven't really tended to see buffs happening in the first cycle of balance changes right after an expansion. So I'm not really expecting to see anything like that in the upcoming balance changes, which I think, for those of you who are watching live, it's supposed to be about a week from now. Historically, we've gotten those balance changes more or less today. That I think is, just a pretty big difference in terms of the amount of data that you're able to get and the amount of time that people have to adjust to things. And again, I think that it makes it for a much more interesting gameplay experience when you have the chance to figure things out and adapt to a metagame rather than being like, well, this isn't going to matter in 2 days because things are going to change right away. That said, I think it is good that Blizzard is being more proactive with the changes to the metagame than they had been in years past, because things like the Grim Patron metagame, they kind of sucked, right? They were sort of boring, and having things be more dynamic and have a chance to fix these things rather than just let them kind of rot, as the case with some of those metagames were, is just generally good. But right now, I don't think that there's any necessarily balance outliers in the metagame, right? If you look at stats from, say, HS Replay, you don't have a metagame where there's a deck or a couple of decks that are far and away better than other things, which is a good thing. I think that's a good thing to see. However, I think that there are some play pattern outliers that are making things less fun than they can otherwise be. And obviously fun is a subjective thing, right? Different people enjoy different things. So saying, oh, well, these things aren't fun isn't really a useful thing in terms of those sort of discussions, unless you can actually identify why are things not fun. What are the sort of play patterns that generally tend to lead people to enjoy a metagame experience less. And I think there's a couple of examples in the current metagame of things that lead to just frustrating experiences and the sort of thing that makes people just close their Hearthstone client and be like, I don't want to play anymore. One of those is the resummoning endless Zilliaxes. The virus Zilliax with Reborn, yada, 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 every ability, is obviously showing up a tremendous amount in both warrior decks and druid decks. Primarily warrior decks are the ones that people are frustrated seeing it in. They're using the Zilliax in combination with Rehydration Station and Inventor Boom to basically just endlessly summon more and 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 more Zilliaxes. I made a dumb, terrible Photoshop edit of Rehydration Station that was just 3 Zilliaxes. Because that's kind of what it feels like when you play against these decks. It's just Zilliax over and over and over and over and over. And I think there's a couple of things that create negative play patterns around this experience. One is that games just play out super similarly, right? You end up with games that are just always about the same thing, which is Zilliax, more Zilliaxes, more Zilliaxes, more Zilliaxes. So they all just kind of run together, right? There's no unique feeling of gameplay across a lot of these games. You have very, very samey gameplay experience that in many cases also invalidates the vast majority of other powerful things that you might be able to do as a board-based deck. Those of you who watched my my set review might have noticed that at the time I was pretty excited about the idea of playing like Taunt Warrior, and not Rehydration Station Taunt Warrior, but like a Taunt Warrior deck with Taunt hand buffs and like the new tradable card that you get an extra copy when you trade it into your deck. But the idea of playing a deck like that in a world where, you know, you're playing against decks that are just making endless Zilliaxes because they just keep casting Rehydration Station off of like Typul Pupil or, you know, Fizzle or whatever. It's just like, why am I doing this, right? They're just doing something which completely invalidates no matter how big the things they make because they have poisonous, and how many of them they make because they can just keep endlessly cycling. It's just ultra frustrating, right? So I'd like to see something done about that play pattern. I don't think Zilliax itself is a problem. Like if you look at the virus Zilliax, that module Zilliax of like that combination of things, you don't really tend to see it that much anymore since the nerf that sent it to 9 mana. I would, you know, preferably not like to hit that card because I don't think it individually is a problem. I think the problem is in Inventor Boom and in Rehydration Station. And I actually suggested this even before Rehydration Station was printed, that I think that they should make Inventor Boom and now also Rehydration Station summon different minions, right? If they each said summon two, you know, if Inventor Boom said summon 2 different mechs that cost 5 or more, and Rehydration Station said summon 3 different highest cost top minions that have died or whatever, suddenly there's now a deck building cost to playing both of those cards, right? You don't just have like, hey, I put Zilliax in my deck, I draw my Zilliax every single time with Town Crier, and then I always get it into play and always get it killed because I have Chemical Spell, blah. Like, I just think that if you actually have, hey, I need to play 3 different taunts before my Rehydration Station is powered up, and I can't just have my deck entirely do this one thing every game, it becomes a lot more interesting. It's a lot more interesting deck build, it's a lot more interesting gameplay. So that's the change that I'd like to see there for Inventor Boom and Rehydration Station. I think both of them sort of contribute to this direction of this just isn't a fun play pattern. It's super repetitive and it invalidates other board-based decks. That's what I'd like to see there. As far as like other sort of play patterns, I feel like the other sort of major play pattern we're seeing a tremendous amount of right now is one-turn kill style decks. There's 2 that really stand out to me, which is Lamplighter Rogue and the Concierge Seabreeze Chalice Druid deck. Lamplighter Rogue, I honestly don't think it's just Lamplighter Rogue. I think Lamplighter as a card is probably just too good. So this is like kind of a 2 birds with 1 stone sort of thing. I think Lamplighter just as a card is too powerful. But I think specifically the one-turn kill play pattern, and getting back to the sort of fun element of it, one-turn kill style decks, when they are popular and prominent and powerful, they lead to games ending in a way that a player feels like there wasn't anything they could do. If you look at the current metagame, it's basically Zilliax decks, one-turn kill combo decks, or like, you know, heavy pressure Lamplighter decks, but I actually see more one-turn kill Lamplighter decks than I do otherwise. And then like board rush aggro decks. And that's kind of it. Because of the existence of the Zilliax decks, most board-centric mid-range decks that are not also Lamplighter decks have been basically pushed out, and because of the one-turn kill combo decks, almost every control deck has largely been pushed out. You can't really expect to play, say, Reno Priest, although I had a lot of success with Reno Priest early on, before the one-turn kill decks became as popular and prominent, because it was very good against the warrior decks, which were, at that time, the most popular decks. One-turn kill decks, basically, you know, it was meme-non, but they do not give the opponent a sense of agency. You do not feel like you can do much of anything except for kill your opponent. And that can be a frustrating experience to play, right? You're just like, oh, nothing I did mattered. My opponent just assembled their thing and killed me from hand. I had an opponent who I think did like 27 with Seabreeze Chalices on turn 3 the other day. It's like, I had a pretty big board, and they're like, okay, Concierge, Coin, Spell Power my guy, Chalice, Pupil, the Chalice, just like, you know, did 27 to me or whatever. And I'm like, oh, okay. And then again, Lamplighter, I think, obviously Lamplighter Rogue. I actually had a game where I was at 30 with Cariel, because I had managed to discover a Maestra and then play Cariel, and I died in 1 turn to like 60 damage from Lamplighters. So those sort of gameplay patterns are very frustrating when it feels like you can't do anything about them. And the only thing you can do in many cases is kill your opponent, which is why we see all these very aggressive decks. And I'll get to those in a little bit, but at first I want to talk about the one-turn kill combo decks. The one-turn kill combo decks, again, are largely focused on Lamplighter and on Concierge. I think that Concierge would be a very easy fix if you wanted to, you know, basically remove that style of deck that's possible. I don't know that that's necessarily a a goal that Blizzard would have, is be like, hey, this deck just doesn't work anymore. But I think it's pretty obvious that Concierge, like reducing a ton of powerful spells to 0 is, like, you know, we saw Sorcerer's Apprentice do that and it was nutty, and now this is, you know, it's basically a Sorcerer's Apprentice that, you know, because you can put the cards from the other class in your deck. If you had to actually discover them or something, it's very different, right? We even see like Tathalon, right? The mage legendary that reduced the cost of things from outside your deck. It can't go less than 1. Why does this go less than 1, right? Like, one of them is a legendary and you actually have to get stuff that started from outside your deck. This one, you get to put those cards in your deck and then they cost 0. What? Especially when it's so easy to combine them and kill your opponent. So I'd love to see Concierge just say not less than 1. I don't think there's any reason for this card to be like as powerful a combo enabler as it is. It can potentially be used for honest purposes, but like the most honest purpose I've seen Concierge used for was to like play a bunch of 1-cost paladin drink style spells and then play a cheap sea shanty or whatever it is, which cool. But even then it's like, okay, you just played 1,000,000 spells for 0 mana just because you played a 3-cost 3/4. It's not even a bad minion. Obviously, it's not a good minion, but I just don't think that style of deck is something with the stated goal of increasing player agency that we've heard from the Hearthstone team in the past is something that like should exist, right? So I'd love to see Concierge just go to not less than 1. It's probably not going to be a good card then, but it's not going to be a combo enabler that kills people in 1 turn. Lamplighter's a different story, because Lamplighter, I think, is both a powerful 1-turn kill combo card, as well as a powerful tool for like elemental decks that are like just looking for finishers. I have played a bunch of Elemental Mage and Elemental Shaman historically, and prior to the release of Lamplighter, I felt like it wasn't really worth the payoff you got in order to keep the elemental chain going at the cost of, you know, playing other things in your deck and the sort of gameplay decisions you have to make in order to, you know, actually keep that chain going long enough for your cards to be powerful. Just having Scar in Shaman or like the Overflow Surger in Mage, not really worth the cost you were paying by playing something every single turn. And Azurite Giant, just not nearly impactful enough in the kind of world that we are in right now. You know, I think that the more frustrating play pattern issue is Lamplighter Rogue. Do you think even outside of Lamplighter Rogue, right? I think that Lamplighter itself is just probably too powerful a card as it exists. So what I'd like to see for Lamplighter is I'd like to see it just become 5 mana 5/5. So then it does a couple of things. One, you're obviously not like shadow stepping it and getting it super cheap or break dancing it and able to play it in the same turn again like the Rogue decks currently can do. 2, it keeps it from being able to be shadow stepped into Sonya, or even the pirate cost reduction into Sonya to make it give you a free one to make it cost 1. That I think is actually a pretty solid change to prevent the 1-turn kill possibility coming from the Lamplighter Rogue decks. I think that ends up being a significant improvement in the overall play pattern that exists in, you know, against those sort of decks. It basically probably eliminates Lamplighter Rogue as a deck, frankly, but I don't think that's the sort of deck that, again, based on the desire to increase player agency, should be a good deck in the game. And also, it makes it so that the honest elemental decks that are, you know, using it kind of as a finishing burn spell can't play it alongside, say, a Scar for extra damage. It'd only be Lamplighter plus Lamplighter. And you can't use it with Brewmasters and play it again in the same turn for huge burst damage, which is something that the elemental mage decks were playing. So, you know, when you have like these decks that are just playing bounce effects just because it's so powerful to play Lamplighter and replay Lamplighter, I think getting it out of the range of that being possible is probably a good idea to keep that frustration of dying to huge burn burst out of the picture. So you could still possibly just get Lamplighter twice in 1 turn if someone has both of their Lamplighters, but obviously a very, very far cry from one of them doing like 30 to you because it's been 15 turns and they played an elemental every single turn. So those are those changes that I like to see. The other part of that sort of trifecta of deck types, you know, the Endless Board Flood Zilliax, or rather Endless Zilliax Control Warrior, the 1-turn kill various decks, and then there's the Board Flood aggro. And I think it'd be remiss to, you know, not target something in the Board Flood aggro style decks, because I do think, especially with the introduction of a lot of the pirates, they've gotten a little bit too good. It's very difficult for a lot of decks to be able to react to the boards that these decks are able to generate, and you know, while having a bit of constraint on the combo decks and the control decks may give other kind of decks room to breathe to play more mid-game, mid-range style stuff and removal that's relevant, I still think they probably need to be taken down a notch. And I think the easy target is Zilliax. I think that the buff your board Zilliax is probably too good with the amount of board rush stuff. And I've actually been advocating for this since before this expansion. I've always found it frustrating that the Zilliax, the reduced cost per guy Zilliax counted all the guys on the board. I find it weird that we're living in a world where like you're punishing your opponent for playing stuff to answer your stuff. And that in particular against like board flood style decks is really frustrating when you're like, okay, I need to play minions to answer your minions. And then you're like, haha, you played minions and now my Zilliax is free or super cheap and I just crush you because I have the Zilliax. Like looking at the stats of any deck that I've played recently that plays that Zilliax, it's the best card in the deck. Like the highest mulligan win rate card in the deck, the highest drawn win rate card in the deck. And obviously for, you know, that kind of card, it's like, that's a lot, right? That's a huge tick against it in terms of being a reasonable card from a balance perspective. So what I'd like to see with Zilliax is to have it probably cost a bit less, that module cost a bit less, but have it only count your own minions. Counting your opponent's minions is kind of the old school, like unleash the hounds, punish your opponent for playing the game thing that we saw. Make it so that you are not in a board flood versus board flood matchup. It's not just like, well, who has the Zilliax? It still could be, but you're not able to like get your Zilliax down for free super early in the game just because your opponent also played minions. You know, seeing stuff like showdown into Zilliax, whatever. Disgusting, right? Like Sigil of Skydiving, setting up your Zilliax because your opponent played any minions. Disgusting. So that's basically what I'd like to see there. I'd like to see a change to that module that reduced the cost to only count your own minions, because I don't think, A, I don't think that card should be as powerful as it is, and B, I don't think it is good gameplay to punish your opponent for just playing minions when there's not really much else they can do when you're trying to play minions against them. So yeah, that's basically my overall thoughts on the metagame. Again, I don't think that there's balance outliers necessarily, but I do think that there are play pattern outliers that I'd like to see addressed in the form of not so many Zilliaxes, not so many OTKs, and not so many of the other Zilliax coming down on like turn 2 or 3 and just ending the game on the spot. So if that Zilliax requires you to have like a full board to like cost 0 or whatever, as opposed to your opponent having, you know, a million things, sure, or cost 1 or 2 or whatever, you know, the more you make it so that card just can't come down for unbelievably cheap / free and just run over games, the better. So that's basically the gist of it. You know, I feel like the metagame has a lot of cool stuff, and I don't know necessarily, like a lot of people are like, oh, why not buff things? Part of that is because I think that the metagame is so heavily defined by those sort of pillars right now that it's hard to say what it would look like when they're gone. If the Rehydration Station Zilliax decks go away because Rehydration Station can no longer just summon Zilliaxes, if the one-turn kill style decks go away or are massively less popular because they are significantly less powerful, and then if the board flood decks are taken down a notch by the nerf to that Zilliax, what does it look like? What new cards see play? Right, I think it's hard to justify necessarily wanting to target specific things that are not currently played to buff, because those things could be good enough if they just don't exist in the world with the sort of overarching dominating pillars that we're seeing right now. So those are my thoughts. I'm hopeful that making those changes wouldn't just send us back to a world in which every deck's an old deck. That's always a concern, right? When you nerf the new stuff, we don't just want to see only stuff like Reno Warrior and Excavate Rogue and Dragon Druid or whatever as like the decks people play, because that would be really boring too. But again, you know, I feel like so many of the possibilities in the new expansion are being depressed by those things that are currently kind of the pillars of the metagame, that it's hard to say what things would look like when those are gone. So those are my thoughts. And again, I really appreciate Blizzard kind of taking their time and not just immediately making a balance change that would have happened like today before we'd get as much information and as much ability to adapt and see how things play out. So even if I am saying, hey, change these things, I don't change that. Let's keep this up and allow metagames to mature more rather than having knee-jerk balance reactions to them. So let me know what you think. Do you think other things need to be changed? Do you think you know, there's things that clearly need to be nerfed, buffed, etc.? Let me know in the comments. But thank you very much for watching, and yeah, hope you enjoyed. I'll see you next time.